March 1942, high above the burning islands of the Dutch East Indies. A Japanese fighter pilot locked his sights onto a helpless American bomber. One press of the trigger, and everyone inside would die. But instead of firing, the pilot made a decision that stunned even himself. In the middle of World War II, he chose mercy. The pilot's name was Saburo Sakai. By early 1942, Sakai had already become one of the most feared fighter pilots in the World War II Pacific Theater. He flew the legendary Mitsubishi A6M Zero, the most agile fighter aircraft of its time. The Zero could outturn almost any Allied aircraft. Its pilots were trained to attack aggressively and destroy enemy bombers before they could threaten Japanese forces. Sakai had done exactly that many times. He was already credited with numerous aerial victories while serving with the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. But on one mission over Java, something happened that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The encounter on that day in early 1982, Sakai and his squadron were patrolling the skies during Japan's rapid conquest of Southeast Asia. Suddenly, he spotted a large four-engine aircraft flying slowly at low altitude. To Sakai, it looked like an American bomber, possibly a B-17 Flying Fortress. Bombers were prime targets. Japanese pilots were trained to close quickly, fire their cannons, and destroy the aircraft before its defensive guns could respond. Sakai pushed the throttle forward. His Zero accelerated rapidly through the tropical sky. He approached the aircraft from behind the perfect attack position. His finger tightened on the trigger. But as he drew closer, something looked strange. The aircraft was not maneuvering. It was flying slowly, almost helplessly. And when Sakai came within firing range, he finally saw the truth. A shocking discovery. The aircraft was not a bomber preparing for battle. It was badly damaged. And through the windows, Sakai could see the passengers. Inside were not soldiers. There were women and wounded civilians. Some accounts describe them as Dutch evacuees fleeing the advancing Japanese army. Others recall seeing people clearly injured inside the aircraft. Either way, the scene shocked him. Sakai later described the moment in his memoir, Samurai. The aircraft posed no threat. It could barely stay in the air, and the people inside were defenseless. Yet according to the rules of war at that time, Sakai was still allowed to shoot. The plane belonged to the enemy. Destroying it would count as another victory, another mark on his record, another step toward glory, a moment of decision. Sakai flew close alongside the aircraft, close enough to see the faces inside, terrified, exhausted, helpless. For a few seconds he held the enemy aircraft in his gun sight. One burst from the Zero's 20mm cannons would rip the plane apart, but something stopped him. Sakai later explained that in that moment he remembered the Bushido Code, the traditional warrior ethic of honor, followed by many Japanese officers. A warrior, he believed, should not kill those who could not fight back. So instead of firing, he did something almost unheard of in aerial combat. He lowered his guns. Escort instead of destruction. Rather than attacking, Sakai flew alongside the damaged aircraft. He studied it carefully to make sure it was not a trick. Then he did something even more astonishing. He escorted the aircraft safely away. For several minutes, Sakai's Zero flew beside the vulnerable plane, protecting it from other Japanese fighters who might attack. The passengers inside the aircraft could see the Japanese fighter beside them. But instead of opening fire, the pilot simply watched. Finally, Sakai dipped his wings, a gesture sometimes used between pilots. Then he turned his Zero away and returned to his squadron. The aircraft continued flying, and the people inside survived. A war that continued mercy did not end the war. Just months later, Sakai would be involved in some of the most brutal aerial battles of the Pacific. During the Battle of Guadalcanal in August 1942, Sakai was severely wounded. A bullet struck his head, leaving him partially paralyzed and blind in one eye. Despite the injury, he somehow managed to fly his damaged Zero over 560 miles back to base. One of the most remarkable survival flights in aviation history. After recovering, Sakai returned to flying combat missions later in the war. By the end of World War II, he was credited with more than 60 aerial victories, making him one of Japan's most successful fighter aces. Yet, when Sakai spoke about his career later in life, one memory stood out above all others. Not a victory, not a dogfight, but the day he chose not to shoot. After the war, after Japan's defeat in 1945, Sakai returned to civilian life. He eventually became a businessman and later spoke publicly about his experiences during the war. In interviews, he often reflected on that moment in the sky above Java. He said that war forced men to do terrible things, but even in war, a man could still choose humanity. That decision stayed with him for decades, and it became one of the most unusual acts of mercy recorded in the air war of the Pacific. World War II was filled with destruction. Millions died. Entire cities burned. But high above the battlefield one day in 1942, a fighter pilot looked at his enemy and decided that victory was not worth killing the helpless. Sometimes, the most powerful moment in war is when someone chooses not to fire.